yo. We're gonna open today by playing a game called Ghost or Coast. In this game, I'll throw out a few scenarios, and each time I want you to raise your hand to indicate whether you would ghost that person or situation or if you would coast. Just ride it out and see what happens. You ready? Let's do it. You and your friend are waiting in line at the movie theater. There's a large middle-aged bald man in front of you, and your friend suddenly starts petting this stranger's bald head. I can't say this seriously. Your friend suddenly starts petting this stranger's bald spot while singing the ABCs. If you choose to ghost, raise your hand. If you choose to coast, raise your hand. All right, next scenario. You're texting someone cool you met at school last week. You might be developing a little bit of a crush on them. You're texting back and forth when suddenly they text,
"No. Once they give me their address, we can sneak in and cut all their hair off."
Then they quickly delete the message and they ask, "What part of town do you live in?" Raise your hand if you're ghosting. Coasting? Okay, so you and your friends are pumped about going to a haunted house tonight. When your parents drop you off at the crowded event where the haunted house is, you realize that every single person present except for you is wearing a full clown costume, including your friends. Who's ghosting? And which of you psychopaths are coasting? I think we can all agree, sometimes in life, the best move is to ghost. You've just got to get out of there as fast as you can. But in general, ghosting culture has done a lot of damage in our world. You've probably never done anything as creepy or outlandish as the things mentioned a minute ago, and yet you've probably been ghosted before, right? You've probably had someone tell you that they would get back to you, and they didn't. You've probably had someone tell you that they can't wait to hang out next week, and then they never showed up. You've had someone text you one day, and suddenly stop the next. It's unfortunately so normal now. It's such a normal way to handle conflict or embarrassment or awkwardness, and it's really affected the way that a lot of us see waiting. It's hard to trust your parents when they say you have to wait until you're 16 to go to parties, because ghosting culture tells you that wait means no. It's hard to trust your friends when they say they'll come to your concert next time, because ghosting culture tells you wait means no. It's hard to trust your God when he tells you your prayers will be answered in a time to come. But ghosting culture tells you that wait means no. And the problem is, when we're forced to wait for opportunities we want, we're left stewing. We're left spiraling. We get thirsty. We get unbalanced. You know that feeling when it feels like there's an eternity of time between now and the thing that you want coming to pass. And you start creating these stories in your head about the other person and why they didn't say yes to you right away. Your thoughts start to spiral about what they think about you and why you aren't good enough. You start to get thirsty and fixated on their attention and approval, and you are thrown off balance. Maybe it's because of ghosting culture. Maybe it's because you've always been burned in other ways. But I think for a lot of us, being made to wait for things we want feels a whole lot like failure. And sometimes it drives us crazy. Hopefully, seeing through the lens of the gospel today will help. If we're talking about being made to wait for things that a person wants in life, Peter's our guy. If you read the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, it's clear that all Peter wanted from the get-go from Jesus was leadership. And Jesus didn't give that to Peter immediately. And you can see it. You can see the thirst. You can see Peter's fixation on it. Nobody was more thrown off balance by waiting than Peter. If being told to wait feels like failure to you, Peter gets it. That's what makes what we're about to read remarkable. In 1 Peter, Peter is writing a letter to the believers to help them grow in their faith. This is years and years after Jesus died, resurrected, and went back to heaven. And in this passage, you see this unbelievable shift in Peter's perspective on waiting. I think it's going to be really helpful for you and me. 1 Peter 5:5. In the same way, you who are younger must accept the authority of elders. And all of you dress yourselves in humility as you relate to one another. Now listen, if you aren't familiar with the way Peter carried himself back when Jesus walked the earth, you might miss how insane it is that Peter is the one writing this. Because if there's one thing we can say about Peter as a young man, it's that humility was not his strong suit. He was braggy. He was overconfident. He always had something to say. He wanted to be the leader. And while I'm not accusing you of being like young man Peter, I do think his encouragement to dress yourselves in humility is helpful, especially for teenagers. Because so much of being a teenager is accepting the authority of the people older than you. It's being forced to wait your turn to lead, to call the shots, to be in charge. And I know a lot of times it doesn't feel fair or right. And you know what? Occasionally, I bet you're right to feel that way. But generally speaking, you are better off having a posture of humility when it comes to the dynamic between you and the older people in your life. I know ghosting culture tells you that wait means no, but Peter seems to be leaning towards a different reality. And the key to that reality is embracing humility. Verse 6. So humble yourselves under the mighty power of God, and at the right time he will lift you up in honor. Again, for Peter to be the one saying that is crazy, because this was a guy who had no interest in the right time. Peter was one of those dudes who felt like the right time was yesterday. So for him to express his perspective is wild, and we should pay attention to it. But maybe more importantly than that, we should pay attention to who it is we are humbling ourselves under. It's easy to think that as a teenager, waiting for the things we want is about humbling ourselves under the mighty power of mom, or the mighty power of coach, or the mighty power of your crush. But actually, and this is super important, humility is not about them. Embracing humility is about recognizing that it's God who lifts up, who gives us a moment of honor and recognition, who gives us the opportunities we're craving, but it's in His time, and we have to be humble enough to accept that. And Peter knows firsthand how incredibly difficult that is to do. That's probably why the very next sentence he wrote was this: "Give all your worries and cares to God, for He cares for you." See, Peter used to be thirsty for his shot. He used to be off balance in the waiting. He used to equate hold with sold, but something happened in his life and in his heart that made him see a different reality entirely. He stopped flexing and trying to prove himself. He stopped looking around at everyone else to see what they thought of him, and he started humbling himself under God's power and timing, and trusting that in one way or another, His time would come. And when that proved too difficult to do, when Peter's heart did not want to submit, when he felt those old habits creeping back in, Peter discovered that bringing those worries and cares to God made all the difference, because God actually cared about Peter, and God cares about you too. I get that you've been ghosted by friends. I get that you've caught a slow fade from a crush. I get that your parents have strung you along once or twice, promising something that they never got around to giving you. But ultimately, securing these opportunities you're searching for isn't about humbling yourself under the power of those people. It's about humbling yourself under the power of your God and trusting that He's working out the timing of you getting the opportunities and achievements and status in life that's right for you. So you don't have to stew. You don't have to spiral. You don't have to thirst when you get put on hold, because the God of the universe cares for you, and He will lift you up in honor in all the ways that are right for you when the timing is perfect. But you've got to embrace humility, and you've got to trust Him. Being put on hold does not mean that you sold. It isn't failure to wait. Waiting is a part of life, and it's part of God's plan for you. So don't equate it with failure. Be humble, trust God, and see if your life story doesn't feel a little bit like Peter's when it's all said and done. Just because they ghosted you doesn't mean that God will. Jesus has made you perfect in His sight, so you can trust that no matter what you say or do, God is choosing to coast every single time.